Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. It's been revealed that Ardie Savea's future with the All Blacks once hung in the balance. His push to quit was amid whispers of player discontent and coaching fractures, exposing deep cracks in the team's foundations. Players apparently openly questioned coaching, discipline, and its overall direction. Today on The Front Page, NZ Herald rugby analyst Gregor Paul joins us to break down the inside story and the deeper turmoil inside the All Blacks. So, Gregor, what convinced you that Ardie Savea was genuinely ready to walk away from his, $1 million plus contract?
Well, I think the fact that he said that he was, without giving you a facetious answer, I don't think there's ambiguity in terms of the consistency of my discovery. It's there all the way through. Everyone that he spoke to is really clear about what he said, which is that he felt that he didn't or couldn't or wouldn't continue, or he didn't want to continue with the final 2 years of his contract. And the reasons for him wanting to do that were he clearly felt that through the choices that he'd made, it must be said, the career choices that he'd made following the 2023 World Cup, that they'd taken him away from his home for too long. He hadn't been living in the family home for various reasons, because he'd been in Japan, then he moved up to Auckland. His kids were at an age where I think one of them had just started school, maybe two of them, which was why they chose not for the family not to go with him. So his wife and three children stayed in Wellington when he's on, earning money as a rugby player. And that kind of nomadic lifestyle, if you like, the playing for so long without a break, his age, probably, I think everyone gets to a certain age in rugby where their body starts to not recover the way they want it to. All of these things happened. And in November, on that end-of-year tour with the All Blacks, he was really clear with first Chairman David Kirk, then Coach Scott Robertson and CEO Mark Robinson, that he wanted to try and talk to them about not fulfilling the final 2 years of his contract.
Do you reckon there's a wider discussion here about players or homegrown players then going across to, say, the likes of Japan, or some of them go to Paris and things like that for the money, about choosing that, I suppose, over a long career with the All Blacks?
I think the idea here is that there is what we call a sabbatical clause that gets offered up to players once they've reached or won 70 test caps, and they re-sign a long-term contract with New Zealand. By long-term, we mean 3 years plus. Then they have the right to negotiate, I think it's up to about 6 months, where they can either not play, which is what current captain Scott Barrett has chosen to do. He is not playing in Super Rugby, or he'll return late, for the last few games of Super Rugby. So effectively, he'll be having 6 months off. He's negotiated the right to do that. Or they have the right to go and use those sabbatical periods to go and play elsewhere. Typically, it's in Japan because it aligns with the New Zealand season. So they can go off to Japan, earn incredible amounts of money, come back and still be eligible to carry on playing for the All Blacks. Jordie Barrett chose to go to Ireland last year, so the option is to go and do that in Europe. Now, where the problem might lie is this is the idea that these guys can have a short period of time offshore, get a different playing experience, get a different lifestyle experience, and continue to be All Blacks. But I think the Ardie example here shows the danger that if you allow them to go, if you don't manage that process particularly well, because he went to play in Japan in 2024 and he's there again this year, which has made his life very difficult. Too much rugby, too much time away from home. And I think what we need to look at, or what New Zealand Rugby certainly needs to look at, is whether they can endorse that in future, and whether they need to be careful about how much time they give these guys to go and meander and sow their wild oats, for one of a better term, somewhere else. They probably need to control that. And they didn't do it very well with Ardie.
Where's he at now?
Yeah, look, he's in Japan. He's feeling better about life, clearly. He's currently negotiating with New Zealand Rugby a playing schedule that they will agree with him once he comes back from Japan, which will be sort of late May, early June. They're then talking to him about saying, well, look, we can't give you another sabbatical period. You've exhausted all those. So he's looking at a number of options around physically taking some time off. So one option is that he will not be available for the July test matches when he comes home, that he just won't play in those. He'll take time out. He'll be at home. He'll recuperate because he probably needs a bit of a break physically, as much as he needs to spend some time at home. The idea there would be if they give him some time off when he comes home, recuperate, rev him up. So the big thing in the All Black calendar this year is an 8-week tour of South Africa, and they want Ardie Savea at his best for that. So that's one option. Hasn't been agreed. Maybe he'll take time off at the end of the year and not go to Europe when the All Blacks go over there. But I don't think that that's the preferred option for either him or the new coaching group. But in terms of where he's at, he's looking at a managed schedule that will take him through to the World Cup. He's given assurance to New Zealand Rugby he will see out his contract, and I think he's probably in a much better headspace. I wouldn't say that the fact that the head coach has changed has been the reason, definitely not the reason why he came back and negotiated from having said he didn't want to be here. But I certainly think he'll be looking at that opportunity as a chance to rebuild, restart, be rejuvenated by a new coaching group coming in.
I suppose if we were to think of it like, us common people, it'd be like using your annual leave because you need a break, but then working for another company or something during your annual leave, coming back to your regular job and being like, I'm a bit tired.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And these sabbatical options, they came into play. I'm old enough. I broke the initial story back in 2008. It was Daniel Carter that this was the first guy because he was going to go offshore for 3 years. New Zealand Rugby went, jeepers, we don't want to lose you. You're in your mid-20s. So they said, how about we let you go offshore for 6 months and that you still remain contracted to us. So it wasn't a panic move, but it kind of was. Create a precedent from there on saying you're now allowed to do this. Senior players can now do this to elongate their careers. To me, it's they get paid an extraordinary amount of money to go and play in Japan, which is what Ardie has done, probably up to about $2 million for the biggest names. But the kicker here, Chelsea, is that they still get paid by New Zealand Rugby on top of that. So while they don't get paid the Super Rugby component of their salary, which is only, and I say only, and I don't mean that in the sense of it's not a lot of money, but it's $195,000 that they miss out on. But these guys are getting paid $1 million by New Zealand Rugby. So they still get paid about $800,000 or $900,000 from their employer, and they're allowed to go and earn money with a separate employer. So these guys can bank up to about $3 million in a calendar year by being allowed to do that, which is incredibly generous. And in Ardie's case, he's done all that and then come back and said, yeah, but I'm really tired. So there's probably I know reading the comments that got attached to my story, there's some people that don't have any sympathy for that. But look, he's landed in a space where he was allowed to do this. He didn't go rogue and just go off to Japan. But it is an interesting point now where New Zealand's best player has hit a wall. And New Zealand Rugby have been complicit to some extent in allowing that to happen. So they are now having to kind of say, okay, well, look, all parties are at fault here. You wanted to do this. You've overreached to some extent. We've allowed you to do it. We probably shouldn't have. So they're retrospectively trying to manage back from there and say, what can we do to make this work? Because he's the best player in the country and they do not want to lose him 18 months out before a World Cup.
Well, essentially, our best players got burnout. Do you reckon, what is the likelihood of them looking at changing those plans or that workaround?
Bowden Barrett has actually done something reasonably similar to Ardie. He went to Japan in 2021, and then he went back again, and I think he was there in 24. Slightly bigger gap between his. Now, he's been fine. He's been okay. He hasn't hit a wall, but he plays in a different position. And he's a different type of athlete to Ardie. Ardie's a collision athlete. So when like even Richie McCaw, who's the greatest All Black of all time, had to take 6 months off playing rugby to get him through to being able to continue playing until I think he was about 34 or 35 in the World Cup final. And he was still at his best by the time he reached 35 because he had taken a 6-month period where he just didn't play. He went off and traveled, and he had a genuine sabbatical, went and did, got away from the country and mentally, recharged himself. So look, these are a good mechanism. They have been a good mechanism in the past to recharge players, to keep them in the country and give them long careers. Ardie's maybe the first guy where the time off period that they've given him a sabbatical period to extend his career, and in actual fact, it's ironically been the thing that might have shortened his career essentially. So I don't think it's about putting a blanket ban on them. I don't think it's about ripping it all up. I think it's about saying New Zealand rugby needs to have a really careful, more detailed, nuanced management approach around its players and says, yes, these conditions can be put into your contract, but I think New Zealand needs to be very careful about allowing guys to go and play twice in these foreign competitions and say, look, we think you need to take time off. You can play in one sabbatical period, you can go away and play. If we give you another one, you're not playing in that one. You're taking the time off.
I think culture is an interesting word in a sporting sense. It's not tangible. Nobody could necessarily describe exactly what that means, but I guess like in any workplace, it's putting people first and valuing people, creating an environment where you get the best out of people. Sometimes that's the stick and sometimes that's the carrot, but it's how you don't shy away from hard conversations, how you cultivate purpose and meaning, particularly within a rugby sense, how you get everyone on the same page from a strategy point of view, the leadership of the team, the people that you surround yourself with.
And we know there was player discontent, obviously, before Scott Robertson's departure. Do we know everything that was happening behind the scenes?
Well, not everything. I wouldn't have thought. We know quite a lot, as it's been detailed in that piece about Ardie. There were a lot of things that were unraveling in that team. I wouldn't put you wouldn't want to put the blame on one person and say it was all the head coach's fault. I think there's multiple people complicit in why a team was unraveling to the extent that it was. And when I say unraveling, it's clear that there were players in virtual open dissent towards the end of that Grand Slam tour in November last year, talking openly in public spaces about their unhappiness. It's very un-All Black. All Blacks don't do that. They might have a few guys up in the room, whining and moaning about a coaching decision or not being in the team, and that's always been the case. But it's never been sort of open dissent because senior players, if they hear that, usually come along and say, you need to be quiet now. That's not how we do it. And guys would be disciplined by their peers or, that. And that's what worried New Zealand rugby was that kind of self-policing mechanism falling apart inside the team. And there was widespread concern about the state of the players, their ability to play for the coaching group. David Kirk, the chair, had been in Edinburgh and London and Chicago, seen firsthand, talking to players what was going on. So what happened was they built quite a detailed dossier of intel about what was going on. And they certainly got the impression that there were so many red flags that they needed to investigate what was going on. And in answer to your question, do we know everything? No, but we know what the end of the story was. The head coach was removed from his role. So that gives you a pretty clear indication that those that investigated what was going on were pretty distressed or found out that there was enough there to say this is something that's bad enough that we have to remove the head coach from his job.
And you mentioned there that it's not very All Black-like. Do you think that the prestige of being an All Black, even from within and behind the curtain, has diminished in some way?
I don't think the prestige of being an All Black has diminished. I think we talked there about the head coach was removed from his role, but I think some of the senior All Black players, in fact, a lot of the All Black players, I think let themselves down quite badly in the final period of Scott Robertson's tenure, because a coach shouldn't be blindsided like that about the level of unhappiness and discontent. The whole self-policing mechanism of the All Blacks and the whole kind of they're there for the team and what's right for the team. Well, what's right for the team is that these guys needed to be talking to the coach. They needed to be saying, this isn't right. We don't think this is going to work. Push back. That's how these environments go. I mean, it might not be necessarily, to some extent, it's what we have at NZME, certainly at the Herald. You push back sometimes to your news editor and say, hey, look, I actually think this is a good story. That's a robust culture that you get to get the best out of people, to get the best out of your environment. And then the All Blacks in particular, certainly when, in previous regimes that I've covered, a guy like McCaw had a senior group around him. They spoke up and they spoke out, and they had a collaborative agreement with the coaches about what they could put into the what they put into things.
One thing I thought was really quite interesting about your article, and why I call upon the prestige of the All Blacks, I suppose, is the ramifications for wrongdoing apparently have, lightened, I suppose. Do you think that's got anything to do with the discontent?
I think it had a huge part to do with the discontent. I wouldn't say that this is necessarily going to be how life will be under the next coaching regime or how it's been under previous ones. But under Scott Robertson's coaching regime, there was certainly a sense, detailed the Damien McKenzie episode where he missed the bus taking the team from San Diego back to Los Angeles, and his punishment was to apologize to the team. Well, in previous All Black regimes, I can absolutely guarantee you he would not have been playing the next week, and maybe even beyond that, might have been a 2-week, because the players would have said, that is a massive indiscretion. That is not reaching the standards that we expect. In previous regimes, if you were late for just a sort of meeting about something not that important, if you're late by a minute, you'd be fined or you'd be disciplined. And so to miss a bus taking you back to an airport was a major indiscretion that really didn't get dealt with particularly well, and it set the tone. It set the tone inside the team under the Robertson era, because he was the culture coach. And that kind of stuff, if you don't deal with it, becomes a massive problem. The All Blacks have an expectation that, you turn up on time, you're wearing the right kit. It's really, really laid out to you what you need to do, when you need to do it, how you need to behave, all this kind of stuff. So if you fail, you're put in front of your peer group usually, and they give you a pretty tough time about, how you've let the team down, all that kind of stuff. So that was quite a corrosive element inside that particular team, because they then had another incident where Ethan de Groot, we don't actually know what his misdemeanor was, but we believe it was he missed a curfew, and then he was stood down for a game. Now, that's the right call in some senses, but it then pushed back against what had happened to Damien McKenzie. So it felt like there's a sort of two-tier of, it depends who you might be and what position you play, and that might have an impact on your punishment. And if you go back to the World Cup, Mark Talea, who was the sort of formed wing of the All Blacks at that time, a really important player to them, he missed the curfew during the World Cup, and he then missed the World Cup quarterfinal. He didn't get to play in it. Now, he was a hugely important player, but they were adamant, you haven't met standards, so you're not playing. And that was really clear to the players in the previous regime. And in the Robertson one, there were all these contradictions and indiscretions that got punished, and some that did and some that didn't. So that became a real issue inside the team.
Right, Gregor. So what next? What do you expect from this coaching team? Are they going to be carrot or stick?
There'll be a combination of the two, as they need to be. I don't think they'll set out with a particular view on one or t'other. It'll be an environment that they set out with really clear expectations for the players about how the team wants to play, expectations around behaviour. These are always pretty obvious anyway when you're an All Black. By the time you've got there, you have a pretty good understanding about how you're meant to behave, what being an All Black looks like, but he will reinforce that. I think it'll be an empowering environment. I think he'll be more collaborative with the players. The players will have greater input, both to strategy and look, off the field. I think they'll be given a bit of leeway to behave like adults. And if they don't, there'll be punishment for that. They'll have a clearly set of standards, and I'm sure that Dave will be really consistent with how he treats the players. If they behave or don't behave, all of that will be really clear to them about what happens.
Do you think there's any more to come out?
I'd be very surprised if there's any more to come out. I think that's probably it. And I don't really know if anyone will. Certainly, I won't be looking any harder or any further, because I feel like that's a fairly exhaustive search that's already been carried out. And secondly, look, the value around doing that now journalistically has probably gone, because the change has been made. We all know there was a problem, and the problem is undeniable because they moved the coach on. They terminated his job. So, no, I think we've probably brought that story to an end. Yeah, I'd say so.
All I know is like change is good sometimes, and having Razor's already got what he's done in Super, so it's going to be pretty interesting, bro. It's going to be awesome. Like for me, even though like great year last year, I sit in discomfort too, because I'm like, damn, where do I sit? Still got to make the team. Some great Lucy's playing in New Zealand right now, so I'm on my toes here, bro. Like I'm trying to still compete and still try and be the best, Yeah. But for an All Blacks, I reckon it's going to be exciting. Got some exciting fixtures. The end of your tour too is massive, so it's going to be great, mate.
And just because I'm interested, when you get kind of like a whispering of, say, an Ardie Savea looking to renegotiate his contract or wanting to walk away, or these kind of murmurings of discontent among the crew, as a journalist, what do you have to do to try and, see whether that's actually the case? Like, how many people do you go through?
In the case of this piece I just finished, I counted it up the other day, and I think it was about 29, if not 30 people, who with direct connections to the information that you're trying to find out. You can't take anything on. There's a lot of rumor, there's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of people that think they know about what was happening in and around the team, because players talk. Players talk to an agent might then talk to the administrator talks to someone, and you can be 4 steps removed, and that story that you're hearing can be completely changed in terms of what was actually happening with Ardie Savea. There were a lot of rumours. Apparently, he was about to sign a contract with an Irish club, or he was about to go and do this. There's no evidence for that, though. When you actually get to the people that you need to speak to, and you find out, you've got to actually talk to the people that were talking to Ardie. Tried very hard to get Ardie himself to talk, but he didn't want to. He may, in time, deal with his situation. He may say something, he may not. But look, you've got to ask. You've got to be 100% certain. You've got to be talking to the right people that can tell you with some certainty, because they're directly connected to that information, and you can be certain about. When I wrote that Ardie was very clear about his intentions, then you can guess. You've got to be talking to people that know what was said in that room, or be confident that they know what was said in that room. So that takes time to put all that together. And in the end, people might not like. I know there's been a bit of pushback from people connected to the story who feel it's kind of going over old ground, or it's being, it's dragging poor old Scott Robertson's regime through the mud one more time. But no one disputes the accuracy of it. That's the important thing. Everyone, the narrative is correct as far as I can tell. The timelines are all correct, the story's all correct, and the public can make their minds up about the value of that. And I guess, what the Herald's building its premium reputation on is being correct, being accurate, and telling stories to that kind of depth. And they give people an insight into what was really going on in the All Blacks, and whether it's valuable or not, I guess will be, our audience will judge the value depending on how many people read it and how many people pay for it.
Well, and it's important for the history books as well, surely, to know what different eras of the All Blacks, which is a team that is not just a sports team in this country. They're held to such high regard. They're put on the highest pedestal. So, of course, it's important. Thank you so much for joining us, Gregor.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is hosted and produced by me, Chelsea Daniels. Kane Dickey is our studio operator, Richard Martin, our producer and editor, and our executive producer is Jane Yee. Follow The Front Page on the iHeart app or wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time for another look beyond the headlines.